So, Halloween ended. And given some of the reception for the newest entry,
I always gotta get props for a big swing, even if it feels like a miss to me. But in execution, it is a miss. And I'm not gonna remember it in T-minus 1 day. Yep, already forgot.
But at the end of the day, this movie did not deliver what it promised. And that is, I wanted to see the Return of the King. I wanted to see the Battle of Pelennor Fields between Laurie Strode and Michael Myers.
And it just becomes a drag, and you're thinking to yourself, are they playing the right movie right now? And that's probably not even the worst part of it. The worst part to me is this movie is extremely disrespectful to Michael Myers.
I think you'd be forgiven if you believe that pretty much everybody hated this new film. Even still, it's important to remember that the internet, especially Twitter, isn't real life, no matter how many people want to convince you otherwise.
How can fandom be toxic? It's about love. They don't fucking understand these movies are important to people.
On a side note here, I don't understand everybody's perspective about how Scream 5 is ahead of its time based on the fan reaction to Halloween Ends. Because Scream 2022 was a clear dramatization of the fandom menace Star Wars crowd, and much more loosely directed to toxic fandom in general. Additionally, I feel like it's totally fine to be disappointed with a film, especially if you're looking forward to it, but it's another thing altogether to let that disappointment drive you to bully people online, or even demand some kind of redo.
Anger leads to hate. Hate leads to suffering.
In truth, Halloween Ends might have taken a bit of a large tumble at the box office recently, but I would hardly argue that such a drop is indicative of the quality of this movie alone. You see, people like to take specific numbers and figures and throw them around without much context in order to prove their half-baked ideas, all the while failing to recognize or even maliciously hiding the broader context. Yes, Halloween Ends was the lowest opening of this new trilogy. Yes, it experienced a noteworthy second weekend drop. And yes, it will likely be the least profitable entry of this stretch of films. But acknowledging all of that, we then must look at the fact that this film was released simultaneously on Peacock, a move that resulted in a similar drop-off for Halloween Kills to its immediate predecessor, and at a time when there was considerably less competition because the box office was still recovering from about a year and a half of COVID lockdowns. At the same time, it's important to remember that Halloween Ends will likely come close to $100 million, maybe even $110 million at the box office. And that's after Halloween 2018 racked up $255 million off of a measly $10 million budget. Cry all you want, but Halloween Kills and Halloween Ends were already essentially paid for after the first film, and that essentially gave Universal legroom to profit off of two highly anticipated sequels while pushing their fledgling streaming service at the same time. I could go on about this, but that's kind of why I want to get back to my real numbers videos. Show your love in the comment section, guys, and we'll do more deep dives into box office news, predictions, and the history of it all. With all that being said, the truth of the matter is you can't keep a good horror movie franchise down, and this is probably far from the last Halloween movie. Even the people behind the scenes know this, with Jason Blum recently stating, "I didn't say it was going to be the last Halloween movie. It's our last Halloween movie. We have no more rights to make any more Halloween." So it goes back to Malek Akkad, and what he does, only he knows. But we're done. This is our last one, and I think people will be very happy. That's similar to a statement made by Michael Myers actor James Jude Courtney, who recently told Screen Rant, "You know, director David Gordon Green and Jamie and I have talked about this. We're done. We're done. I think for me to put this character down, Jamie and I were talking on the set towards the end, knowing that this was the end for us. We kind of compared it to the Super Bowl. I'm 65 years old, she's a year or two younger, but we're not spring chickens. We're both vital and vibrant and athletic and youthful, but we're moving in places in our career. I feel like this was a Super Bowl win. I feel like 2018 and Kills were playoffs, and I feel like Halloween Ends was the Super Bowl. And we freaking won, dude. So best to win with a big ring in our hand and walk off into the sunset."
Quality schmality. If I had a TV show, I'd run that sucker into the ground.
Amen, boy.
Now, I'm not going to sit here and tell y'all that I think that this is a bit of an affront to someone's grand vision of something. I tend to like sequels. I have an entire video essay in my mind about why they're such a good thing, but again, that's another video. With all that being said, here's a couple ideas of how to continue the Halloween franchise after Halloween Ends. Tales of Halloween. This one is kind of a fan dream that I know will never happen. Essentially, the idea is to set the movie sometime in the 2010s, using a teenager's Halloween party in Haddonfield to kind of explore the various timelines of the shape over the last couple of decades. The goal of this movie would be to wrap up the many timelines and story threads left hanging by all the restarts of the franchise up until the start of the Green Trilogy. One of the things I like about this idea is that it would give a bit more context to Green's trilogy, while solidifying the entire franchise together into a coherent narrative. In a way, I feel like this movie could say that Michael isn't just a man who killed 3 people on Halloween of 1978. He is the boogeyman of this town, someone whose presence has echoed across it for decades, inspiring different types of interpretations for his motivation and even backstory, and kind of solidifying that everything that we've seen from the original film onward is just a cinematic portrayal of these ghost stories told amongst the children in Haddonfield. This is something the Green Trilogy touched on, but I don't think it did a good job making it clear to the audience. Probably because 2018 sucks, but I've already covered that in another video.
Flashback.
When it comes to breaking down why Halloween 2018 just isn't the best film, I feel like it's a little bit easier to talk about one of the film's biggest flaws, that being the god-awful twist that we get more than halfway through the film, as Dr. Sartain reveals that he's more interested in seeing Michael hunt down Laurie Strode than literally anything else, and thus putting us on a collision course to the climax of the film. This is such a divisive twist in the series that not only fans have been debating it over the last couple of years, but we even got one of the producers recently coming out saying that he fought against it. Recently, Ryan Freeman, one of the producers of Halloween 2018, as well as Halloween Kills, came out and said, "I'm going on record and say I was never a fan of the Sartain twist from 2018. Fought that one tooth and nail that sometimes you get outvoted. But fans react to certain things, then it causes us to pivot certain storylines in certain ways." And look, I think we have to agree with him at this point. Sometimes you get outvoted in these things, and generally I think a lot of people like that twist. The reason I'm bringing it up here is I never really understood it. And when we spend the first 40 minutes of the entire movie dealing with these podcasters who are going out of their way to create a story about Michael Myers and Laurie Strode, regardless of whether one even exists at this point. And it's just always been so weird to me that Sartain's entire motivation to get Laurie and Michael in the same environment to see which one of them comes out the winner is pretty much aligned with exactly what those podcasters wanted to do in the first place. But some of the biggest problems that I have with this movie that we haven't otherwise discussed are just all of the things that it takes from the sequels that it tries to ignore. We've already seen PTSD Laurie Strode not once, but twice, and both are better than this iteration. We've seen them do legacy sequels before legacy sequels were even really a thing, and we've seen Michael come back to Haddonfield years after the entire town forgot him. And with all of this in mind, from admittedly a pretty big Halloween fan, it's never not going to be weird to me that this movie calls itself out by saying that the original movie isn't really that shocking anymore, and that nobody really should care about this specific iteration of Michael, given that it strips pretty much everything that we know about him from all the previous movies.
End of flashback.
Halloween never ends. I know it would be hard, if not impossible, to justify how Corey could somehow survive his wounds at the end of Halloween Ends, but I don't care. I'm a fan of that character and the movie as a whole, so I'd be totally down if they decide to do something like this. A direct continuation of the first film. This is kind of a if it's not broke, don't fix it perspective of the series. The Green Trilogy showed that there doesn't need to be any real connection with the overall canon of any popular horror franchise. Not that narrative continuity is really all that important to most horror icons, especially Michael Myers in the Halloween franchise, but you get my drift. Ditching the Michael Myers-Laurie Strode familial bond was tantamount to throwing away everything that had kept this franchise breathing for nearly 40 years. And just given some of the reactions for Halloween Ends, you can tell that the fans really cared about that relationship between those two characters. Even when the entire point of the last 2 films of that trilogy were to say that that relationship doesn't really make sense anymore.
We're gonna say that Michael never actually cared about Laurie Strode, he just wanted to go home. Oh. All right.
Admittedly, that type of retooling only worked for the Green Trilogy because it was able to get Jamie Lee Curtis back for one last ride as Laurie Strode. But maybe, just maybe, this series could take another wild swing into unknown territory by wiping the slate clean once again and picking up with Michael Myers back in the 70s. For context, I'm somewhat basing this off the script Halloween Returns, written by Saw writers Patrick Melton and Marcus Dunson, but it has a great POV sequence at the beginning that I think works perfectly here. Essentially, my idea is that we open up the movie with an extended POV shot from Michael's perspective, but during the events of Halloween 1978. following Michael all the way until he is shot off the balcony, with a blurry image of Loomis peering down over him before he disappears to check on Laurie, as the camera then effortlessly sits up with Michael as we fade into our opening credits. From there, I think the story of this movie or any potential sequel could follow Michael just stalking other towns and cities as the Shape. Frankly, I really like this idea because it would showcase Michael Myers' supernatural appeal and how he's constantly able to get away with murder and mayhem while avoiding detention or serious bodily harm, while also keeping him firmly blanketed in a bed of realism. And quite frankly, I feel like this is probably the best way to walk that fine line between the two halves of the fan base. The ones who really like the first and 18 for its realism, and the ones like me who have a fondness for The Curse of Michael Myers and Halloween Kills. Additionally, I feel like keeping the story firmly planted in a pre-digital connected world would create a decent amount of stakes for individuals in those particular stories. The only downside of this idea, in my opinion, is the narrative lack of a Loomis or Laurie type of character. Michael Myers is a great slasher villain, but you don't get to 13 or potentially 14 movies by just being a fun villain. Just ask Freddy or Jason. No, the thing that makes Michael Myers more than anything else is how he interacts with the people trying to hunt him down. In the original series, Dr. Loomis acted as a bit of a Captain Ahab to Michael Myers' Moby Dick, and Laurie essentially took over that same role in H2O and the Green Trilogy. For better or worse, any movie that doesn't have that interaction between Michael and his necessary counterpart seems destined to fail. So with that in mind, I guess it is worth asking whether a direction like this would require recasting of Jamie Lee Curtis or Donald Pleasance, but that's not necessarily what we're talking about with this video, so we'll leave that discussion for another day. The Holiday Killer. Did you know that John Carpenter attempted to make a sequel to Black Christmas set on Halloween before Mustafa Akkad commissioned him to write and direct Halloween? I've always found that little piece of movie trivia pretty interesting because it seems to suggest that Halloween was a movie that was going to be made by John Carpenter eventually. And you can definitely see this in the final product from the original movie with all the love and attention that John Carpenter and Deborah Hill put into conceiving the final product. Even though this was really the type of movie that everyone just kind of expected to make their money back, not start a 13-film franchise with. Regardless of any of that, it has always struck me as strange that the Halloween franchise has kept to the certain Halloween nature of it all. In reality, there isn't anything specific to this franchise that requires Michael to strike only during that specific holiday.
The Festival of Samhain, October 31st.
Well, not anything specific outside the first film's novelization and everything that was explored upon in the Thorn trilogy. Still, in the same vein as what we discussed previously, it would be really interesting to follow up on the concept of the Shape through other major holidays and see how much would change from just that one difference. Come to think of it, Michael couldn't really get away with wearing his mask on any other night besides Halloween. And seeing how that would play out in Christmas or Thanksgiving would be really interesting. An anthology route. Count this one under things I don't think are going to happen. Not because I don't want to see this franchise ditch Michael Myers. Season of the Witch is a great film, and one that is finally getting the love that it truly deserves. I'm just saying that this will likely never happen because there isn't that type of bravery to shift in that direction. It's kind of crazy to me that people these days think that audiences are just more accepting of new and original ideas, more than they were in the 80s. I really disagree about that. It's hard to imagine that everyone's going to embrace a Halloween movie without Michael Myers, after the most toxic part of the fandom just lit up the entire internet after one movie had Michael Myers in it. If anything, it would be interesting to see Akkad swing for the fences by doing a follow-up to Season of the Witch. And that's basically solely off of the recent appreciation it has garnered from the horror community. Barring that though, I'm not entirely sure if doing an anthology series with a Halloween name is the best financial decision, even if it's definitely the thing that I would most love to see on this list. A direct continuation of Halloween 4: The Return of Michael Myers. Okay, so we all agree that Halloween 4 is one of the best endings throughout the entire series, right? Recently, I came across a unique perspective that Halloween 2, 3, and 4 make up the perfect Dr. Loomis trilogy, where the story revolves around the good doctor being forced to understand that the cycle of evil never really dies. And even with the death of Michael Myers, his dark influence would continue through different generations. Anyway, I've always found it a little sad that the series didn't attempt to continue with the Jamie Lloyd killer route, because it would have been the most interesting take on the series going forward. A lot of the blame goes to Mustafa Akkad, who vetoed the idea even after signing off on the ending of the 4th film, all because he was rushing to meet the release date for the 5th film in the franchise in order to benefit from a nice financial bonus. However, one of the big roadblocks into securing that sweet cash was that Michael Myers had to return as the villain for the sequel, and that Jamie Lloyd could not be Michael's successor. So instead, we got the cinema classic that was Halloween 5: The Revenge of Michael Myers. Yeah.
It's what we're here for. Rescue cats. Find dogs. That's our job. And we love it.
With the recent popularity of the 4th film, as well as its own 40th anniversary coming up, this might be the right time to get Danielle Harris back in the role that made her famous to begin with, and also continue with one of the biggest bright spots from this franchise's long, storied history. Either way, I think it is rather clear that the Halloween franchise won't simply end anytime soon. I just hope that what they decide to do next is interesting and meaningful, that takes the story into new and interesting directions. But that's just my take.
The KRW Network.